All right, we're back here on the Giants Huddle podcast brought to you by PSEG, energy efficiency for game time and anytime. Visit PSEG.com/Giants for discounts, rebates, and home energy assessments. Front of the program from NBC Sports. You can see him in the coverage of the Derby this weekend, among other things. He's Connor Rogers. If you want to hear his draft takes, though, one of the 3 or 4 best draft podcasts out there that I always listen to religiously, the NFL Stock Exchange that he does with our buddy Trevor Sikkema via Pro Football Focus. Go search for that on your favorite podcast platform. What's going on, Connor? How are you, man?
I'm good, John. Thanks for having me, dude. This is one of those ones that you get a little extra excited for when you like the team's draft. And I just think the Giants did so well that this is a fun group to talk about.
Absolutely. And you're a New York guy, so we always like to have you on to talk some Giants here. So give me your 20,000-foot overview of what the Giants did before we start digging into the individual players.
The right balance of value and needs, right? So many teams go into the draft. It's interesting to me how scrutinized a team like the Lions have been when they attacked certain needs as well, but everybody thought they didn't get value. So I think there's a fine line there of, hey, we need a center. Hey, we need a corner. But do you just take the one that you graded the highest, but maybe he's more of a second or third round player and you're picking the back end of the first round? So I thought there was a very tactical approach. It was very clear the Giants did their homework, not only on the talent of this draft, but more importantly, how the board would go, right? They could have reached for a wide receiver in round 1 instead of getting value later on. They could have taken their round 2 pick in round 1, and I would have thought it was a good pick. So I think understanding the landscape of the draft, the valuing of players, you deserve just as much credit for that as the actual picks you make.
Yeah, and you need luck too, right? Because sometimes the value just doesn't line up every year. And I've been joking, the Giants just send a thank you card to the Commanders, because if they take Christian Gonzalez instead of Emmanuel Forbes, the Patriots probably pick Deonte Banks instead of Christian Gonzalez.
It's true.
And then this whole formula is a lot different, isn't it?
It really is. It's funny how, especially an in-division team, can do you a little bit of a favor. My full honesty is, I've been saying, I think the Giants were even a little surprised. And that's why they made that pick swap. They got to the point where they're like, enough is enough. We can't believe Banks made it this far. Let's do the little sweetener just to lock this in and not have any risk about it, especially if a team like Jacksonville might have been on the phone with a couple other teams because of how highly prioritized the top corners were in this draft. So you always need a little bit of luck. But, hey, 5 years later, when the draft class looks really good, nobody cares about the luck. They care about the players actually panning out.
Yeah, and then the Lions taking the linebacker and the running back when they had a cornerback need. That was, so you want to go back to Devin Witherspoon going to Seattle, right? Because that probably took him off the board for Detroit, and it's the cascade of different scenarios that anything can really happen. So let's talk about Banks. We've been talking about him in terms of the fortune of getting him there. He just seems to match the scheme too. I needed a corner, but it's not just a corner. It's a corner that in college played the exact type of way Wink Martindale is going to want him to play for the Giants. So what is it that you liked about his tape when you watched him at Maryland?
The length and athleticism to survive out there on an island and know, hey, the ball might be coming my way and I got to be ready to make a play because there's a certain amount of trust put in me out here that not a lot of secondary players kind of get. So that's what Wink looks for, right? I mean, you guys know as well as anybody, you're going to see a lot of pressure looks, cover 0, cover 1, and that sounds fun, and it's fun for everybody in the box. It's not fun for the guys that are holding up one-on-one in coverage. That is a very difficult assignment. I remember really when I just started writing about football, watching Darrelle Revis in Rex Ryan's defense for the Jets and the amount of pressure that was put on him allowed the Jets to really outnumber the opposition in the box. And I think that's Wink Martindale's goal with his corners. And when you look at Banks as a player, he has very, very unique traits in terms of the way he can move. He could flip his hips and recover down the field vertically where you never think he's out of a play. He knows how to find the football. I was telling people before the draft, the thing I liked the most about him, more than all the fancy numbers and his RAS and all the testing, is that there was a couple times where I saw him get beat and give up a catch. And then the rest of the game, he was locked in and ready to go. That's the NFL. There's adversity when you're a cornerback in the NFL. I'd rather you deal with it in college and know how to deal with it in the NFL when you get there rather than being in shock. So I think Banks will have the right mindset to thrive in a very tough situation as well.
Yeah, the one thing I'll throw out there with Banks is just in fairness in terms of being balanced here is maybe a little bit handsy down the field. Sometimes when, a receiver can put either the double move or do a little shake on him, he does get his footwork a little wonky, and then he will reach out and grab. And sometimes when he does get beat at the catch point, he doesn't get his head around. He ran into a couple receivers with his back turned to the ball a couple times. If there's one thing he'll need to clean up, and look, that all young corners do that sort of stuff. Yep. That's kind of the one thing that I saw on tape where I'm like, all right, this is something Jerome Henderson, the Giants defensive staff, is going to have to work with him on.
Oh, without a doubt. And you know what? You're looking at it and going, like you said, a lot of these corners are not perfect players coming into the NFL draft. I remember a lot of that criticism applied for Sauce Gardner as well, where
Yep.
he was a very physical, grabby, long kind of player. And it's about learning what you can and can't get away with week by week. And I think that's not, sugarcoated. There's going to be a transition period for Deonte Banks, as there is for all rookie corners. But when you look at the long-term fit and the profile of the player into the defense, it felt tailor-made.
100%. All right, let's move on to John Michael Schmitz here. What is it that you really liked about him? I know you probably had him higher than most other
Yeah.
analysts out there. You think you had him, what, top 25 on your board?
Yeah, I believe he was 25th or 26th. I know he was in my top 30. I saw maybe the highest floor of any interior player in the entire draft, if you count Skoronski as a tackle. Next up, though, out of the offensive lineman in terms of floor was John Michael Schmitz. He's played a ton of snaps, over 2,000 snaps, a ton of starting experience. He's a great reach blocker. He's got a good anchor. He's got the right body type to be a bigger, tougher center. We know that's what Joe Schoen wants to prioritize, is getting a little beefy in the middle of that offensive line, being able to drive defensive linemen off of the ball immediately off of the snap. Would you like him to be a better tester? Sure. Maybe that's what limits his ceiling, as this guy that he's not going to fly out of the gate and be this elite puller or climber. But I think he knows how to get to his spots where he makes up for the mediocre testing times with the awareness. He called out protections for Minnesota. He's a leader. He plays with a little bit of a different edge. I was down on the field there at the Senior Bowl watching him, and it felt like every single rep was an extra dogfight through the whistle. And I like that in centers. I like that when they're getting after it a little bit after the whistle as well. So for John Michael Schmitz, I think he's an excellent run blocker. I thought he was reliable in pass protection, just steady Eddie in pass pro. You never really have to worry about him. He loves to look to help. And I think ultimately he will be the best center to come out of this draft. And I thought ultimately one of the higher floor players once again in this offensive line group.
And you mentioned his experience. He's an older player, but I think that helps for a guy like him, right? I think the transition will be easier for him because of all the football he's played. And frankly, he's going to have to be good right away. Washington has some pretty good players on the defensive line. Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis, hello. And then you have the Cowboys that run a bajillion stunts and movement up front, so he's going to have to deal with that. So he's going to get thrown right into the deep end of the pool. And I think being an older prospect in his case, I think probably helps him more than it hurts him on the offensive line, because his body's developed and his mind is developed.
Exactly right. I mean, you don't want to be going into a situation where guys still developing anchor strength or technique issues. And a lot of offensive linemen in this draft had both of those, to be honest with you. This was not a clean offensive line draft that guys are going to be thrown into the fire and have this great success early on. John Michael Schmitz, Peter Skoronski, those were two guys I outlined and said, yeah, they'll be fine right out of the gate, whether it's the playing experience, what they were asked to do. There was a lot put on his plate at Minnesota. You brought up the stunts and the twists. His awareness was phenomenal as well. So that, I mean, it's weird to me that in a draft that had so many question marks, that in my opinion, one of the rare sure things, and I don't care that he's a center. I knew that would cause him to fall a little bit, but he makes it out of the top 50. I think that's going to be a head scratcher in a couple of years for teams.
Yeah, I think another one of the safe guys was Steve Avila out of TCU. He was a guy that, look, he's going to be good. He could play two spots. I'm with it. Even those tackles at the top of the draft, like Jones and Paris Johnson, like they have stuff on their tape where you're like,
they do.
Like
they got work to do.
This is not Tristan Wirfs. This is not Andrew Thomas. This is not kind of the guys at the top of the class of the last few years. All right, let's go to the third round. Jalin Hyatt. Giants have to move up to get him. It cost them a fourth round. Let's start the trade first. Was that worth the price of admission, that fourth round pick?
I think so. I mean, I had Hyatt at 40th overall in this draft. So for the Giants, I mean, let's be real here. The Giants walked out with player number 26 and John Michael Schmitz. I had Deonte Banks at 30 and then Jalin Hyatt at 40. They walked out of the draft with 3 top 40 players. I'll pay that price to get that guy.
Me too.
With Jalin Hyatt, I mean, Will Fuller-esque, that upright, slender running that you got to be a little careful. You don't want somebody to line you up with that upright running style in the NFL, but not a lot of guys had that opportunity because he ran by defenders in the SEC. If you're running by defenders in the SEC, you're going to run by everybody at the NFL level. I don't really worry about that. I thought his tracking was underrated. Hyatt got mislabeled as this one trick, really vertical, threat. And I don't, sure, but that's a really valuable trick to have. And is there polish in the trick you have? Tracking, catching the ball, getting off the line of scrimmage. So I thought for the Giants, it's one of those twofold things, right? It's a situation that Hyatt's a big play threat. I thought they needed vertical speed on the outside. All of that's great. I'm not saying Hyatt comes in and has 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns out of the gate. And I don't know if the Giants want to be that kind of offense with him right away. But can he take a couple of defenders out of the box and help out Saquon Barkley because of the kind of speed he has and stress the back end of the defense? Yeah, I think he does that from day one.
No, Connor, you hit it out of the park. And this is what I've been saying to Giant fans. Look, there's going to be some development here, right? He comes from an offense where he wasn't asked to do a lot of things. And that's not the player's fault. That's just what he was asked to do. So he has to develop his route running, his route tree. He barely saw press at all in college. He's going to have to develop the ability to beat the press. That's fine. You can work on that. He can get better at that over a couple of years. But even if he is just a vertical deep threat, post, slants, comebacks, flies, flags, those type of routes in your first year, what that'll do for Darren Waller in the middle of the field, having to keep that safety over the top, it just gives Brian Daboll and Mike Kafka, and you don't think Kafka knows how to play speed receivers from his time in Kansas City? Of course he does, and that's going to create mismatches in the middle of the field and one-on-ones for other players because you cannot leave him one-on-one on an island with a corner because he can just run by you.
That's exactly right. And that's absolutely, something that you can't teach. You guys either got the play speed or he doesn't. And a lot of guys with the play speed don't have the nuance of the position to actually go find the football down the field.
Yeah.
I mean, Hyatt's tape speaks for itself. So a third round value, there's a lot. The thing with Hyatt is everybody worried about the risk because of his weight. And you brought up the offensive system and there's risk there. After round 2, risk doesn't matter anymore. When you look at the hit rate of picks, I'm going to take the risk on the upside guys. And that was a swing that was worth it to me.
No, 100%. And I think the Giants are thrilled to have him just add another piece of that wide receiver core. You're probably still looking, I think, for your true one. I don't think Hyatt's that. So you have some work still to do, but that is a role that in any offense in the NFL is essential. And if Wando Robinson's healthy, you got your speed guy, you got your twitchy slot guy, and then you still got to find kind of your 3-level receiver, which at some point you figure it out down the road.
Yeah, and you want balance. And this is a wide receiver group that didn't have that balance last year because they didn't have time to build it that way. And now they've gotten the big threat, like you brought up in Waller over the middle of the field. You got outside speed in Hyatt. You got gadget guys like Wan'Dale Robinson. You have your possession targets underneath as well. And you know they're going to be able to run the football, especially with the addition of JMS in the fold as well. So, and Daniel Jones' rushing ability on top of all of that. So now you're seeing more balance now that they've had a little bit more time to build it out.
And then in the 5th round, I love Chase Brown. I want him to be there. He didn't quite get to the Giants, but Eric Gray is a heck of a consolation prize. And for fans that haven't watched him, boy, you want a guy that can go in there on third downs and either, run draws, go in the slot, run those option routes out of the backfield, those angle routes. He is a really polished third down back that can make people miss and do a lot of different things that can help your offense.
He had a great breakout season, and he's been a pretty productive running back throughout his entire college career where he's gotten to play 4 years. But you brought up the pass catching. That's the key. That's what gets him on the fields right away. He was a reliable pass catching threat for Oklahoma. That one cut ability, he made defenders look foolish at times. His ability to set up in the open field, hang in there in pass protection. This is really a coach's dream for a rookie running back. If you're not looking for a star, you're looking for somebody that can just contribute and get your starters some breathers off the field to get off the field. Eric Gray was really good value. I think I valued him kind of differently than the NFL. I'm looking at the running back rankings right now for him, and he was somebody that I had as the 8th best running back in this draft. He was a Senior Bowl guy. Once again, he found that breakout season this year. He really rounded out his game. He's well balanced. He can make you miss, but just having the ability to consistently catch the football and not be a zero in pass protection, which a lot of rookie running backs are. It's not something that they're coached up enough to do at the college level. That's not Gray. He was asked to do that a lot, coached up to do it a lot. This is the perfect kind of, hey, next man up. If Barkley gets dinged up, or honestly, without that, I think he'll still get on the field here and there right away.
Yeah, and, I think his contact, he's got that 5'9" body. He's got such a low center of gravity. And I think I'm going to call him explosive, even though he doesn't test as an explosive guy. His ability to change direction in the open field. He turns defensive backs around in a circle a number of times when you go back and you watch his tape. And it's just that low to the ground, direction-changing ability, where he does get caught from behind on tape, absolutely, but he creates space with that quickness and his ability to, frankly, break tackles, again, with that low center of gravity.
He doesn't hesitate. That's the key thing. A lot of running backs are thinking, how do I get 40 yards and a touchdown? Eric Gray had always felt like, how do I turn 2 yards into 9? And I'd rather have that, honestly, for a running back at that stage of his career, because it's not to take away from him. He still has chunk plays, but he knows how to make a defender miss and not think of the next layer of the defense. He knows how to get the yards and get upfield that are there. And that's what you're looking for a guy, whether it's inside, outside running, but most importantly, those little swing passes and outlets that are a quarterback's best friend.
All right, Connor, let's get into the Giants' other day 3 picks here, because I did not watch a lot of these guys. I've gone back, I've watched what I can, but I'd love to get your take on them. Let's start with Trey Hawkins, the cornerback out of Old Dominion. Your thoughts?
A long corner, classic project corner. This is what Wink Martindale looks for, right? You're looking for a defensive back that's got the arm length, that has the size, a little bit more of a slender guy. And once again, it's that watered down version of Banks, right? He's not the athlete of Banks. And you talk about how Banks needs to find the football a little bit more. I think that was the trick with Hawkins, where you like that size, you like the ability to disrupt at the line of scrimmage, but you understand that this is the back end of a roster kind of stash project and go, hey, if we have a couple injuries in year 2, can you step in and survive for us on the outside? So I thought that was the trick with Hawkins, is get a developmental player that fits our scheme, that projects to be on the outside. And you look at the Giants roster 2 years from now, they might have some competitions there at corner. He doesn't have to play this year, but when you're at this late of the draft, this is ultimately kind of how you function. You look for somebody that you get them into camp, you see what they have, and can they be a legitimate backup fringe starter for you by year 2 or 3?
Yeah, you look for traits that can translate and you can develop. And I think when they saw Jordan Riley out of Oregon, they say, oh my goodness, guys of this size don't last till the 7th round. Let's see if we can just turn him into a run stopper on the defensive line.
Exactly. A rotational run stopping piece that's had that long college career. He obviously played at Nebraska, transfers to Oregon. Oregon's very well coached on their defensive front. When you look at Riley, just that size, the fact that he's probably going to play at 330, you just rotate him in there and could be goal line situation, could be early down situation. One of those players, once again, that not an every down role kind of player, but how do we get more stout up front? And the Giants low key had been looking for some defensive line depth in this draft. I think the board fell a little differently for them, that they wisely capitalized on other areas, because I thought this draft didn't have a lot of defensive line depth through the first 3 rounds. So you take a swing at Riley, that's played for a really good defense under a good coach in the pack at Oregon after transferring from Oregon, and you say, hey, let's give you a really, really limited role, but help us 2-gap at times and stop the run.
100%. And then we'll get to Javarius Owens, someone I know some people thought the Giants got pretty good value, and I think Dane Brugler had him as a 5th or a 6th round grade on his board.
Yeah.
Safety out of Houston, has played a lot of football, and he's going to come in at the very least and help on special teams right away.
Yeah, I had Owens, I think, in the 6th round. I'm looking at him on the big board right now. He was somebody I got to watch the last month of this cycle. I had him at 220. I had a 6th round grade on him. I was a little perplexed he was there at 254, and things get a little convoluted on that late of the draft. Some guys do fall, but you just look at the kind of skill set he has, the kind of length that he has. He is this classic moving piece on the back of a defense where he's got a little bit of length. He has plenty of athleticism. I feel like, honestly, they probably really liked him for special teams, long-term third safety, because you can kind of make him interchangeable at free or strong or as a big nickel. But when you have that kind of size and straight line ability, you kind of like those guys on the kickoff and punt coverage units. So Owens, I had him ranked higher than the other 2 picks. I think there's a world where he becomes a long-term third safety in the league, and at minimum just kind of fits the special teams profile teams throw those darts on day 3.
All right, let's take a look at some other things in the draft real quick, Connor, before we say goodbye. Other NFC East teams, the other 3, how do you think they did? Giant fans obviously trying to catch Dallas and Philadelphia here and fend off Washington, who was just a game behind them in the division last year.
Yeah, I think the Eagles had the best draft in this division. That's not really a hot take. I thought the Giants were, just a little bit behind them. But the Cowboys and the Commanders made some questionable decisions for me. Giants fans have heard about the Eagles and what they've done a million different times with all the different Georgia guys. With the Commanders, I thought Forbes was a reach. I had a lot of corners taken after him ahead of him. I thought he was a 2nd-round player. I liked Christian Gonzalez better than him. I liked Deonte Banks better than him. I liked Cam Smith better than him. So that one was a little bit weird to me, that you needed to take that guy in the top 20. Maybe they couldn't get out of the pick, or maybe they just really liked the player. They got a good safety slot in Quan Martin on day 2. I think that'll really help them. When you look at the Cowboys, it's not that Mozzie Smith in the 1st round is a bad player. He's going to free up space for Micah Parsons and the likes of those guys to roam around and make plays. But do you need to take that player in the top 30? Right. And some people valued him differently. They looked at the athleticism. I didn't see him play to that athleticism as a pass rusher.
Totally.
If you're a great athlete as a bigger guy, okay, what does that mean? Does that mean you're too quick for guards and centers, or you just do unique things sideline to sideline? I didn't see that consistency with him. So yeah, it's nice you got a 2-gapping presence, but I don't value that as a first-round pick. And then the Luke Schoonmaker pick, he's one of those players that you go, man, I'd like Luke Schoonmaker in the 4th round. A move blocker, an older prospect, maybe some upside as a pass catcher, not after the catch, but just as a possession guy. You take him that early. Did you need tight end that early? I don't know. The Cowboys, for me, didn't get difference makers in this draft in a division that everybody else was trying to get difference makers because it's this dogfight. It's this race. Everyone's trying to catch Philly. They were in the Super Bowl last year. The Commanders, at least they took the swings. The Giants got the value. They got the picks that have high floors, but also value in their spots and a ceiling guy in Jalin Hyatt. The Cowboys, man, they usually draft pretty well with Will McClay there.
Yeah.
I felt like they were a little all over the place in this draft, whether it was age, lack of value, or guys that just won't make an overwhelming difference in a season. That division's going to be really tight.
Yeah, I kind of felt like it was a need draft for them where they focused a little bit too much on that, and they could have moved around a little bit and done something. Just pick Michael Mayer in the 1st round, and I think everything kind of would have looked better from there. You know what I mean?
In a thinner draft, you need to be very careful chasing need. Mm-hmm. And I think the Giants realized that because people like me were like, man, this draft's so thin. You could take a center at 25 and it's fine because you got a good player. And it's, things fell their way with Banks and the center. With the Cowboys, it felt like a lot of the conversation around the Giants where it was like they really need some beef on the interior defensive line. It doesn't really exist in the 1st round. We knew Jalen Carter would be gone. Kalijah Cansey's not beef. He's all pass rush. And they just did it anyway. So it'll be fascinating to see how that plays out and if it ultimately hurts them down the road.
Talking to people around the league, Connor, and I was shocked by this watching the draft. Why did Luke Whippler and A.T. Perry fall as far as they did in the draft? It just, I don't get it watching them as much as I did on tape this offseason.
I'm kind of floored. I had Perry at 131. They got him at 195. And I thought I was low man on Perry. Apparently the NFL was much lower than me. I think a big body target like that doesn't have great play speed, but can kind of overcome that in contested catch situations is worth a 4th round pick. The NFL did not agree. Whippler is so far off the board, I can't even understand it. I had him at 61. He went at 190. That to me, you never want to assume, but when you don't know the answer and it's that difference, it's usually medical.
Medical or off the field, right? One of the
medical
other.
Or off the field. The two things they always tell you. If it was medical, I still would have taken him in the top 150. At that point, it's worth the risk. So good for the Browns. The Browns had no 1st or 2nd round pick, and they cleaned up. They did pretty well.
What else kind of stood out from you? Surprises, good, bad, or elsewhere from the draft, kind of tracking it over the weekend?
The bad is the reach on specialists. I cannot wrap my head around taking a kicker in the 3rd round if you're the Niners. If I sat there all week to make a pick as a GM, and they took Jair Brown at 87, and then you take Jake Moody in the top 100, just go pay a kicker $3 million a year on the free agent market and use the pick on depth on the offensive or defensive line. I hate all of that. The Patriots traded up for a kicker in the 4th round after having a good draft. Christian Gonzalez and Keon White were great ads. But that's what they do. They always take specialists early. I thought the Steelers just knocked it out of the park, and they needed to. Darnell Washington, I mean, you get him at freaking 93. I had him in the top 20. Him and Pat Freiermuth in a 2 tight end set in a division that everybody comes out of the corner of the ring and throws their biggest haymaker. I like that a lot. Talk about helping Kenny Pickett, Keanu Benton. You want to talk about beef on the interior. I thought Keanu Benton was a better player than Mozzie Smith, and he went in the 2nd round. So I can't really wrap my head around that. Seahawks, my favorite draft, A+. They got 2 interior line players that I valued as starters, and Olu Oluwatimi at the center, Anthony Bradford, the guard from LSU. Witherspoon, I think he's a future top 8 corner in the league. Jackson Smith and Jigba's your number 3. You're living pretty good when Jackson Smith and Jigba is your number 3 wide receiver.
Yeah, I love the Colts draft, Connor, and it's nothing to do with it. It has nothing to do with Anthony Richardson. You could remove him from the draft, and I wouldn't care. Julius Brents, all right, I think that's good value there. I had Josh Downs as an early 2nd round pick, and he fits perfectly with Pittman and Pierce, right? He'll be a great check down target for Richardson out of the slot. You know, Blake Freeland has to add strength, but he has, I get it, toolsy tackle. You roll the dice if you can develop him. But then I had a Barre in round 4, where the only reason he's a round 4 pick is because he played out of position in Northwestern. If he was a 3 technique there, he would have been a 2nd round pick in this year's draft. And then Darius Rush, I had him as a late 2nd, early 3rd round pick. You watch him at the Senior Bowl, he's running routes for wide receivers, and he tested at great. Evan Hull's a 2-way running back. I thought Ballard did a phenomenal job.
Here's the craziest part, John. They got Emil Ekiyor in the UDFA process, who should have been taken in the third or fourth round of the draft from Alabama. Undersized offensive lineman that is just a phenomenal player. They couldn't have done more. They could not have done more. I think there's an argument to be made that two of those three corners they've taken are going to be longtime starters. Brent Rush, and then Jalen Jones, who was a former 5-star recruit at A&M. He was an okay player. He didn't have a bad career there. He probably should have just stayed in school and had that breakout season. I mean, it's insane to be able to turn over your roster with, they got 12 players and it feels like at least 6 of them will hit, which is just absurd. Even if that's starter level, not great, but starter level, that's really, really impressive drafting.
All right, last one on the draft. We talked about the quarterbacks, and I was happy. Not that Will Levis had to wait around the first day. No one wants to see that. I felt bad for him. He didn't deserve that. But I think both him and Hendon Hooker wound up in good situations where they don't have to play right away. You can be patient with them. They can learn behind veterans. And I'm just happy that they're not going to be put into a spot where you're going to ask too much of them too early. And I think it gives them a pretty good chance to succeed.
I'm with you. It's funny to go through the whole process. I've released my final top 300, and it'd been this way with the quarterbacks for a while. I had Will Levis 38th overall and Hendon Hooker 42nd overall. And when you drop that, a lot of people that are more in the national spotlight, me and you are definitely more in the draft weeds, look at that and they go, how could this be? These guys are going in the first round. And you go, just because they're projected to doesn't mean that that's the right call. They have a developmental trajectory that is much longer than a lot of other guys. With Levis, it was really more timing and decision-making and play speed. With Hendon Hooker, it was passing under pressure and getting healthy and being an older prospect. And they went, you're 100% right, in situations that align with their future success or give them the best chance to succeed. They're not saviors for their franchise. And honestly, if they were expected to be, I don't think that would work out for them. So we go full circle. We do this process for almost a year. And you really come full circle, and it all corrects itself at the end.
And then Richardson landed with the coach that turned Jalen Hurts from a running quarterback into a great passer. So, I mean, I think he wound up in a good spot too, even though maybe he'll have to play a little bit too early. I mean, could you pick a better coach to coach him up than Shane Steichen? I don't think so.
I don't think so either. You look at the principles they were able to apply with Jalen Hurts, and then you throw Anthony Richardson into that, and you're like, ooh, that kind of scares me a little bit if I'm a team in that division, because they're going to know what to do with him early on, how to maximize his running, allow him to take shots down the field. I don't think they're afraid to play Gardner Minshew if they think Richardson needs a little bit more time. It's, you look at Stroud and Bryce, like they're in it, whether they're ready or not.
They're going.
They're going. With Richardson, I actually think if they need to keep the training wheels on, they will. I know people will be clamoring to see him play because he's must-watch TV, but I really like that landing spot for a roster that seems to be getting right.
All right, Connor, finally, before we say goodbye, big picture Giants here. What direction do you see them moving? How far along the bell curve are they? Can they, compete for the division? Are they just going for a wild card? Just kind of your thoughts on where the Giants are and now offseason number 2 under Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll.
I think they're getting back to the playoffs, and that's a big win when you look at just how much obstacles they had coming into the offseason. You had to figure out a contract for Daniel Jones that makes sense for both sides. You need a Saquon Barkley back in the fold. And you need to improve the roster, and they were able to do that through the draft. Well, here might be the biggest thing. Their coaching staff's intact. Yeah. A lot of people thought those guys would get poached. So for the Giants, it feels like to me, we know they're ahead of the Commanders. I'm leaning that they might be ahead of the Cowboys right now, which the Cowboys would probably be very disappointed if you heard that. It's hard to pick against the Eagles. They were in the Super Bowl. The roster has gotten better. Hurts has taken a really, really big step. The one thing I look at, though, Hurts' play style, they will need to be careful. You don't want him hurting his shoulder again or missing any time. And now you don't have Gardner Minshew there anymore as your backup to kind of get you by in those stretches. So I think the Giants are in for that wild card positioning. And here's the thing. Year 2 of Brian Daboll, Jones will be even more comfortable. I think the roster will be more comfortable. The offensive line has been a pretty young unit that should be ascending and trending in the right direction. So the Giants, I like what Joe Schoen's been able to build and his understanding of when I need to put my foot on the gas pedal and when I can kind of slow play things.
All right, Connor, tell the folks where they can find you.
Sure. At Connor J. Rogers on Twitter. You can find everything there, all the draft coverage for NBC Sports and Pro Football Focus on the NFL Stock Exchange pod. John, thank you so much, man. It's always good to talk draft with you. I know you are in the weeds like us. It's great.
I try to. Fortunately, I can't do much of it during the season, but once we hit January,
That's more impressive.
Yeah.
That you catch up that fast.
I try. I do my best. Connor, great stuff, man. Always a pleasure, dude. Great seeing you, and we'll talk to you next year, man.
Thanks, dude.
Connor Rogers, John Soto Podcast. Thanks for being with us. It's all brought to you by PSEG. Until next time.